Hey guys, welcome to 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And here's what I need you to do. Make sure you subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel to stay up to date to everything we're doing here on 3 and Out and the Volume. I guess we'll start with Jimbo and Saban. And listen, on the context of what they're saying, my personal take now with NIL, the payment system for college athletes, I don't care anymore. I never really did, but I absolutely do not care. Guys complaining, some programs have more money than others, the rules not fair. I'm over it. Figure it out. I'm not diving deep into the regulations. I hate the NCAA. I don't want the government to get involved with anything. Leave us all alone with everything. But definitely just figure it out. That's on the sport to ultimately corral some of this. It's clearly a little out of control, but listen, some programs are going to have more money than others, right? USC has an unlimited amount of cash. And now that they have this huge advantage because they don't have to hide it anymore, and they struggled at it for a long time, they're always getting popped, that they have a huge advantage. And Lincoln Riley is taking full advantage of that. And one theory I had why Saban was popping off a couple days ago is Jordan Addison, the star wide receiver who, as of recording this, just committed to USC, took visits to Texas and Alabama. And I wonder if when he took visits, and listen, in the history of college football, and I know about a prominent player who's just got drafted in the NFL who, was being shopped. This was 3 or 4 years ago and got a ton of money to go where he went. And this was well before anything was ever legal. Listen, guys have been getting huge bags of cash forever. But you weren't going to give a guy $7 million in a bag of cash. You were giving him $75,000. You were giving him $145,000. Well, now we're talking millions, and this becomes a little more difficult. The Texas schools, enormous advantage. Ton of money in Texas. It's called oil. And Texas A&M are taking full advantage of it. And some of these SEC schools are at a disadvantage. USC, advantage. Cash, unlimited. If New York had a college, they would dominate. A lot of big cities in America do not have colleges. When you think about the biggest colleges in America, really, it's the SEC right now is running circles around everyone on the field. They're not in major cities. So it's going to change. Not that Texas A&M is, but the Texas oil money is no joke. And Jimbo has an unlimited amount of reserves. Now, is it a little disingenuous to act like Saban was cheating years ago at Alabama? Everyone was, Jimbo. You were the head coach at Florida State. You don't think you were handing out wads of cash to get that team, I don't know, that won the national championship? Remember once upon a time, Steve Spurrier called you Free Shoes University? That was when Bowden was there. But I've never cared about people cheating because I didn't consider it cheating. I considered the NCAA scamming everyone. All those administrators in the NCAAs, I've always looked at them like losers. The athletic administration, in my experience, when I was around at Fresno State, if I wouldn't employ fucking any of them. I couldn't respect them any less. Now, I'm not saying that some ADs aren't high level, but I think there are a lot of people in quote-unquote administration that are scamming everybody. When I was in the NFL, if you were a scout, you had brought value. If you were a contract negotiator, everyone involved with the football team was bringing value. A lot of these people with these administrative titles, in athletic departments and in the NCAA, it's a joke. So I don't have that much faith that they're going to fix it. But ultimately, it's great for college football. It's the SEC right now is the biggest conference in America by a country mile. The only, there's not really necessarily a close second. Ohio State is technically the most watched college football program in America when it comes to college football, but their overall conference, to me, is way behind the SEC. We see it with the amount of NFL players going there, and really beside Ohio State, they ain't producing national champions. The SEC, 3 straight years, 3 different national champions. Now, obviously, Alabama has played a big role in that, but I've said it for a long time, it's NFL light. The way they're covered, the interest, the fan base, the money that's flowing down there, they have separated themselves over this period of time. And it's fun. I enjoy it. Part of today was, I don't even care what they're arguing about because ultimately they're arguing about something that is not going to change overnight. It's not really that big a deal. Everyone's getting cash now. But I found it great drama. it makes that conference more interesting. And it already was the most interesting conference. So there's a reason that every NFL team is always represented at the SEC championship game. There is a reason that their games regionally, I think about this. I'm sitting here in Northern California. The best player over the last 5 years from my 20-mile radius that produces a ton of Division I players went to the University of Alabama. His name is Najee Harris. So there's a quarterback right up the road playing at a rival school that used to play in Antioch. Najee went to Pittsburgh, or maybe this kid's at Pittsburgh. Najee went to Antioch. I might be screwing up my high schools. But that guy, who is a big-time potential 5-star quarterback, he's going to be a senior this fall, is more than likely going to go play in the SEC. And I don't blame any of them. You know why? Because when I watch it on television, it's cooler. It feels more important. Then when I watch the NFL draft, it's all their players. Then when I watch the NFL, the majority of the top players are from the conference. So this just breeds interest to the conference, regardless of them screaming at each other. I mean, it's the best coach in the country. Have another guy who's a national champion who actually works for him, named Jimbo, screaming in a southern drawl how mad he is at Nick Saban, how they'll never talk again, he's dead to him. That was type stuff the NFL used to give us in like the Bill Parcells day and Mike Ditka. You don't get that anymore because coaches, a lot like players, get in this kind of lane, and I don't blame them necessarily, of not talking like the way I talk because it's not worth it for them. They don't want to constantly be in these fights. Saban, I don't necessarily was looking for a fight. I think Jimbo was right. Huge narcissist, egomaniac, used to getting everything he wants, and chirped and finally got a guy because there wouldn't be many in the country. Saban could call out a lot of programs, and they would not fight back. Jimbo Fisher has $100 million in the bank. He's got $100 million more coming. He's got 18 5-stars on his team. He don't give a shit. He did not care, and he attacked back, and it was entertaining, and I enjoyed it. And think about this. It's May 19th, and we're talking about the SEC. We're not talking about these other conferences. Now, USC did just land the guy, and I do wonder if Nick Saban, like I said, they wanted him, and they couldn't afford him. And at least now, I've always talked like that. The media always refused, like they pretended no one was getting paid. Everyone has been getting paid for a long period of time. Now it's just at huge numbers, and I do wonder, we'll see if the numbers come back to earth a little bit, because how many guys in college football are worth $1 million? Now, how many guys are actually making that much money? I don't know. We're only a year in. Feels like it's the wild, wild west. It's actually a great time if you're going to be a college football player to do it, to be a college football right now. Because there's a chance in like 5 years, the going rate, is like $100,000, right? $150,000. Right now, some of these guys getting $500,000, $700,000, getting enormous deals. Half these guys are not going to live up to it. For every Caleb Williams, there's going to be a lot of flops. I mean, that kid at Clemson, DJ Ungulale, was the number 1 recruit, goes to Clemson, gets a Dr. Pepper commercial. He sucks. He's terrible. Now, I don't know if Dr. Pepper necessarily cares, but some of these companies that are paying enormous freights of money for these hype guys are going to be like, that ain't worth it. Hell, we make fun of Baker Mayfield for being on all these commercials. And he's a starting quarterback, or was, in the NFL. So I think, listen, it's never been a better time to be on the internet. Money's flowing, no regulation. You know what's going to happen to my kids in business on the internet in 30 years? Ton of regulation everywhere. It ain't going to be a free-for-all. It ain't going to be what I got to enjoy, or anyone listening to this who's part of the internet in some sort of commerce. And who knows, maybe if you're listening to this, your business over the years has been regulated somewhat on the internet. Hell, I just saw a bipartisan bill being passed going after Google. So it's just the internet, we've had a good time. And I haven't really been in it that long, but the people that have been in it 20 years, wild, wild west. And, if you figured it out, you've printed cash. If you're a top high school recruit right now, you are getting obscene amount of money. I mean, some of these guys are making more money than guys in the NFL. I mean, there are a ton of 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th rounders in the NFL that make league minimum, $800,000. Now, I don't know how many guys, again, that's what's hard to tell. Like, how many guys are actually making a lot of money in college football? I'm talking a lot of money. Like, I'd argue if you're getting $250,000 as like a offensive tackle, and I don't even know if the offensive linemen are getting it. It's hard because it's not all public. So it's all these coaches bitching and moaning. That's ultimately, like, I don't even care, but I just enjoy the entertainment value of these guys screaming at each other. And it's why the SEC interest, this year will be the most popular year in the history of the SEC, and the following year will be even bigger. Now, eventually it's going to stop, or maybe another conference, somewhat comes up to their level, but I think it's going to be difficult because the second biggest conference, one thing that they're always going to battle is their weather. Like, it's just so much nicer to go to these SEC schools. And it's not like one thing the Big Ten has are really good academics. If I'm a top college kid, like most of these guys don't care that much. Like, wow, you're Michigan, you're a great school. Who gives a shit? I want to go to the NFL. I want to be a first-round draft pick. I'd rather go to LSU. I'd rather go to Alabama. I'd rather go to Texas A&M. Like Wisconsin, we got great academics. Well, can we make the playoffs? And maybe it'll be easier as the playoff expands, but it's where we're at right now. Jimbo, Saban, fireworks. Guys, confidence is big in life. It's also big in the bedroom, and you got to be ready when it's time to go. Because BlueChew.com is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in a chewable tablet. The process is simple. You sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of the licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you receive your prescriptions within days. The best part, it's all done online. No visits, no doctor's office, no awkward conversations, nobody knows. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped directly to your door in a discreet package. No one has to know. If you could benefit from some extra confidence when it's time to perform, Blue Chew can help you. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use the promo code MIDDLE at checkout. Just pay $5 in shipping. That's BlueChew.com, promo code MIDDLE to receive your first month free. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information, and we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring the podcast. Colin had a take yesterday where he said that Derek Carr is a Hall of Famer. And I disagree. Now, if his career ended right now, he would not be in the Hall of Fame, and I don't view him as a Hall of Famer. Now, just me personally, my views on the Hall of Fame are different than a lot of people. I think it should be such an elite club that damn good players never sniff it. That fringe guys never get in. When I think the Hall of Fame, it's the best of the best of the best. It's Peyton Manning. It's Brett Favre. It's Lawrence Taylor. It's Jerry Rice. It's Ronnie Lott. It's the all-time greats of the all-time. It's Ed Reed. It's Ray Lewis. I mean, it's no doubt about it, no brainer. You don't even have to think twice. John Elway. You don't spend 1 second thinking about it. Basically, every guy in my Hall of Fame would be would be first balloters. If it takes you 3-4 years, no, that's not saying they're not really good players. Like, it took John Lynch forever to get in the Hall of Fame. In my Hall of Fame, there'd be a cutoff on guys like that. It would the safeties would only be Ed Reed, Ronnie Lott. Obviously I'm missing some, but the best of the best. And clearly that's not the case. So a lot of guys get in. But I would not put Derek Carr in. But one thing that part of Colin's argument was he's played for one of the most dysfunctional franchises in the history of professional sports. And you could argue in one of the most, they make money, and they did, especially before they got to Vegas, mainly because they were in the NFL, not because they were well run. But, for a franchise, something that's worth that much money, there probably aren't many businesses. Because I would say the Raiders, if you just put them on the open market, would get, if it was a true open bidding. The NFL doesn't really work like that because they're kind of they pick from their own members. It's like a country club. They pick and choose who gets to come in. So usually they give it to people that are already associated with it. Like David Tepper bought the Charlotte, I almost call them the Charlotte Bobcats, the Panthers, the Carolina Panthers. They play in Charlotte. But he was already a part-time owner. Same with Jimmy Haslam. That's usually how they do it. But if they did have open bidding, I think they'd get $5 billion. So most $5 billion companies, you say, are pretty well run. Well, the Raiders are a fucking joke. And they have been for a long period of time. So Derek Carr, what I do agree, and I was thinking about this, I have no business not being a successful person in life. I grew up, both my parents had jobs, both my parents were educated. Mom didn't quite finish college, but she went to college. My dad had several degrees, all full-time jobs. I grew up in an area that had good public schools. I had just a good support system. I went to college. I had support at every turn. There was never a night in my life, unless I got in major trouble or refused to eat because I was pissed off, I didn't have food on my table. Like, every advantage in life I had. Now, I didn't grow up super wealthy or anything, but I didn't go to private schools. But I grew up with support system from my family, food, education, you name it. Even though I think education is a little overrated. But I do have multiple degrees that I never used. But the point is that I had zero excuse to fail. And I remember getting to Fresno State, and, we recruited guys that came from nothing. And that's just part of, Division I athletics, especially in football or basketball probably, right? Guys that come from nothing. And I remember being around them and thinking like, God, this guy's a really high. I remember Ryan Matthews, who's one of the nicest guys ever, who's now coaching football at his high school, I think, in Bakersfield where he grew up. And obviously played in the NFL. This guy grew up in a car at periods and points in his life. And some of these people, what they overcome, like that is much more impressive. Now, obviously, he had God-given talents to play football, but I'm just talking about the way he acted and treated people and what he's doing now, his impact on society, right? Like, he had no business, just like a lot of people, and it's not just athletics. Google the majority of millionaires and billionaires in this country. They're self-made. And I know it's fun on social media to be like, oh, just all these rich losers just get handed money. Well, actually, that's not the way it works. That's actually not the way in this country it happens. The majority of successful people, when it comes to money, come from nothing. And when I say come from nothing, like, don't inherit the cash. Create a business. I mean, we're a country of entrepreneurs. We're a country of commerce. I mean, it's capitalism. It's great. I love it. But my point is, it's much more impressive. Because part of it, if I give you two guys worth $100 million. One guy came from nothing and made the $100 million. The other guy took over a business that his dad gave him and did it. We all know who we'd pick as the more impressive guy. And it's no different with quarterbacks, right? Like, Tom Brady overcame a lot, right? Later round pick, didn't even get to start in college. He was not handed anything in life. But he did get drafted by the greatest coach of all time. And went to a team with a pretty high-level owner and a stable defense. Like, it was a pretty ready-made situation. Peyton Manning went to a joke franchise at the time, the Indianapolis Colts. And Peyton Manning, there's a small percentage of people, just like in society, that no matter what could overcome anything. I don't think, like, I've matured a lot I always have a lot of respect for young people that are really mature. Like, I hate thinking back of, not that I was a bad person. I mean, I treated people well, but just the way I thought about life, and I was selfish, and just some of the ways, like, I think back on, like, my early 20s self, and I don't like that guy. I don't have that much in common with that guy. Not my morals and my character stuff. That hasn't changed, but just the way I thought about things. It makes me kind of cringe. And I just remember, and I still, if you meet them now, young people that are just really focused, really high level, really mature. I have a ton of respect for that. And those people, I would argue, are outliers. Just like Peyton Manning, LeBron James, guys that you could just throw in a franchise in pro sports, immediately take them, dominate. Those guys are outliers. Most guys need help. Matt Stafford, we shit on forever. It's like, he's overrated, just makes a bunch of money, puts up helpless stats. No, actually, he was really good. He just happened to be playing for, I don't know, the Detroit Lions. That you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy to go there. He comes to the Rams, 1 year, Pro Bowl, Super Bowl, rest is history. Can you imagine? Because I was thinking about this watching the Warriors game. Andrew Wiggins, who was the number one pick in the NBA draft, 8-9 years ago. Came out of Kansas, blue chip guy. Goes to the Minnesota Timberwolves, one of the worst franchises. A-Rod owns it now, but before him, in all of professional sports. Consistent loser, place where players go to rot. Even Kevin Garnett, one of the greatest players in NBA history, you'd argue underachieved for a large period of his career as his team did. Him individually was good, but his team was a joke because he played for that franchise. If Kevin Garnett had just gone to the Spurs, just a high-level franchise, I mean, who knows? Maybe he's a top 10 player of all time. And Andrew Wiggins was a laughingstock. A joke. And then he went to the Golden State Warriors, where they have champions all over the place, who are high character, fantastic, like ethos of the franchise, fantastic just way they operate as a group, what they value, which is winning, and has excelled. He became a starter on what looks like to be a championship team. He does whatever it takes, and they absolutely love him. And no one can make fun of him anymore. And the thing is, most people need help. Most people need someone to show them the way. I did. I needed my parents. Without my parents, there were other people along the way, but there is zero chance. I repeat, absolutely zero chance I'm sitting here. Because without my parents, I never get to Andy Reid. I never get to Colin Cowherd. That does not happen. You know, most people, now the athlete example can be a little off because Andrew Wiggins has God-given attributes. You know, he's 6'7", he's an elite athlete that most people don't have. But my point is there are a lot of Andrew Wiggins all over the country who, if they had the right infrastructure, they could thrive. Just like quarterbacks. Do you know how many quarterbacks who could have lasted as long as Derek Carr with the Raiders? Not many. Not many. Matt Stafford's one because we saw him do it with the Detroit Lions. But I'd even argue with the Raiders, and I had a front row seat for it when they were here. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Every single year they were talking about moving. Every single one. We're going to move. We're going to move. We're going to move. As they're firing coaches, as they don't have enough money, as they're getting sued by cheerleaders, as they're firing the president, as they're doing this, as they're doing that. Then they finally move, and then they bring in Gruden, and then he gets caught in an email scandal. Their wide receiver kills someone. You know, it's just one thing after another. The franchise lose millions of dollars in a tax scandal. It's hard. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more dysfunctional place that, you know, way back in the day, before I was even born in like the 70s and 80s and like John Madden days, they thrived in dysfunction. And I think there were probably points and times in society where it was easier to be dysfunctional and operate as a public company or public job. It's harder now, I just feel like, with the internet. It just exposes you more often. So to me, the other part that I hate about these Hall of Fame arguments is that, because I saw this last year with Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford still has 5 or 6 really good years left. So if Matt Stafford goes on to win, let's say, another Super Bowl and his multiple-time Super Bowls and then rattles off several Pro Bowls with the Rams, do you know what I'd say? That guy's a Hall of Fame player. It wasn't his fault that he played for Detroit for that long. Derek Carr now he's 31 years old, potentially 7, 8 years left. What if he has a ton of success? What if Josh McDaniels, like Belichick, this second go-round, figures it out and they just become a really good, consistent franchise? Now, I probably would bet against that as long as Mark Davis owns the team. Because based on Mark Davis's ownership, everything crumbles. Now, potentially, if they get him out, get a new owner, who knows? But it is very, very hard to overcome certain things in life. In football, bad owners, bad franchises. Pretty consistently, it ruins your career or derails or slows down your career. It's pretty hard to overcome certain things, like if you can't read or write. Like, that would be pretty difficult. It just would, you know? I mean, I got yelled at every day to do my homework. Every single day, yelled at to do my homework. I hated homework. I still cringe thinking about homework to this day. I hated school. School bored me. But if my parents wouldn't have forced me to take it seriously, I would never have been able to get my graduate assistant job coming out of college. Because, hell, I might never have been in college to begin with. Again, hated school the whole time, but it's just who you have supporting you. And in football, owner, coach, GM, your teammates really matters. So to me, Derek, what he's overcome with the Raiders, I don't think he gets enough credit because he's such a polarizing quarterback. You know, he really is. This notion that, like, to me, Kyler's not overcoming much in Arizona. They've been a consistent winner before he showed up. I know they had a bad year when he showed up because they had the number 1 overall pick, but we saw before with Bruce Arians and Carson Palmer. Every year they were winning. Like, I've seen them win under Steve Keim. I've never really seen the Raiders win. They never won without Derek. They were like 12 straight years of losing. And now they've only had 2 playoff seasons with him, but those are 2 more than the previous 12 years before he showed up. Look at Stafford. I mean, that place, all they do is lose. The 2 best players in the history of the franchise retired at 30 years old. Like, that happened. Barry Sanders, Calvin Johnson. Google it. I like what the Chargers did pre-draft. I think they were solid in the draft. Overall, they filled a lot of needs and have a better, more rounded team to support Herbert. But wasn't enough. Is there an argument to be made for more passing game weapons? Thinking speed outside, yeah, I mean, I think you can nitpick any roster. Like, there is no roster. Look at the Eagles. I'd argue the Eagles roster is pretty stacked, but their quarterback we don't really like. What if I told you the Eagles had, like, Justin Herbert? We'd be like, oh, they're going to win the Super Bowl. You know, the Chargers are like, well, we need a speed wide receiver. I mean, your team is loaded if you're a Charger fan. The Chargers, to me, have zero excuse to not beat 12 wins. And I'm not just saying that because, you know, I make fun of Brandon Staley for being somewhat fraudulent. I'm saying that simply because their roster's elite. I mean, I think I could coach them 10 wins. Big fan of the pod. Next 10 years, who are you taking? Herbert, Burrow, or Josh Allen? I think the guy is Allen, but is there any concern given how heavily he relies on his run game? Allen can also stand in the pocket and sling it, of course, but you wonder how much that is opened up by the run threat versus some Herbert or Burrow who stand in the pocket. Yeah, my first gut reaction would be Josh Allen. But that's the type of list, like Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, or Josh Allen. You know, it'd be like, would you rather have Max Scherzer, Pedro Martinez, or Greg Maddux? You know, I just, obviously those guys are older and more accomplished, but you know what I mean. You know, I don't care. I give me any of them. Now, I like a bigger arm guy. I am pro Joe Burrow, but to me, his arm's closer to Tony Romo, but he's a better player. You know what I mean, though. I would go with Allen or Herbert. I would choose between those two, and my first inclination would be Josh Allen. So I would probably rank it Josh Allen. And listen, I'm not saying that Justin Herbert has done more than Joe Burrow. He hasn't. But my list would go Josh Allen, Herbert, Burrow. Love the pod. Big fan of the Washington football team, but want to ask a question about the other NFL dumpster fire, the Browns. Do you know what's good about sports? You can't just have, like, elite friends. You can't just have the Packers and the Steelers, you know, and the Rams. You need dumpster fires. You need good and you need bad. This is an entertainment product. You got to have a little bit of it all. Do you think that Goodell will push Deshaun on the commissioner's exempt list until all 22 cases are clear? It would motivate Deshaun to settle, keep him away from the media and navigating the legal landscape, and placate some of the 32 owners. I steal from truckers. Haslam has a fully guaranteed contract. He still would get paid and be around the team but can't play. There was a story, if you haven't seen it, that came out last week. Deshaun's talking in these depositions. And one of the things he said is this one of the girls who immediately cried. And she's claiming that he inappropriately touched her with his penis. Earmuffs, kids. That's why I used that the P word. I didn't want to get too graphic, you know. And simply put, she was in tears. He didn't even disagree. He said that. She was crying. Now listen, any human over 25 years old, if you're a man, you have made a girl cry. So just because a girl crying does not make you guilty. But it's hard when you read he made her cry and not think, did he do something? You know, this is all made up and she's crying and he's acknowledging it. And then he texted her. I don't want to screw up the exact verbatim of the text, but it was, my first thought was like, the more Deshaun's going to talk, the worse this shit's going to look. And I don't see how Roger Goodell, this to me seems like a pretty easy one. Throw the book at him until he proves that he's innocent. Because why, for who, for what? Why are you supporting Deshaun Watson? Like, what has he done in this situation? You have had so many scenarios in the past where you weren't aggressive enough and you've gotten crushed. To me, I suspend him for the year. I've been saying this over and over. Like, Zeke Elliott got suspended for 6 games. He didn't even do anything. So Deshaun Watson, like, these girls, something happened. He was, you know, no one's denying that they were all around each other. So, and things are happening. Like, I'm uncomfortable reading it. The other thing with Deshaun Watson is, like, listen, to each his own. I don't know the relationships everyone's in. He had a girlfriend a lot of this time. Like, do any of us talk about, like, is this guy kind of a scumbag? Kind of a dirtball? You know, like, and listen, some relationships, you know, with the rich elites are open. But, so who knows? But I don't know. Is he just kind of a loser? He went from being this guy that I always talked about, like Deshaun Watson, great guy. The way I talk about, like, Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes. And it's like, God, he kind of just makes me cringe. you had a girlfriend and you had to use all these massage therapists to hook up? Like, what are you doing, bro? I don't know. Browns look like, I would suspend him for a long period of time. That would be my move. As a lefty, I love watching a left-hander throw the football. My favorite quarterback growing up was Michael Vick. As a Giants fan, and his mobility and athleticism was just a plus. For the reason I always hope Tua will be one of the better quarterbacks in the league, even though he hasn't shown that he will be with time. If Tua doesn't perform well this season, will that be the end for the lefty quarterbacks in the league? There doesn't seem to be any lefties coming out of college, and I doubt if Tua loses his starting job to anyone will pick him up as a backup. Now, if he lost starting job, he'd get picked up as a backup. There is a ton of pressure on Tua Tagovailoa. Because if he does not play well this year, Tom Brady's going to be their quarterback next year. That would be my prediction. If Tua sucks, they miss the playoffs again, Tom Brady will be the starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins. And then the following year, he'll be like a part-time owner. Like, that to me is how it's lining up. Now, if Tua's really good, they can make the playoffs. Tua throws 30 touchdowns, and he looks just like a good young player, then maybe just write it out. But if it doesn't, if Tua's struggling, throwing a bunch of picks, turn it over, can't see with that little pea shooter arm, underthrowing Cheetah, I would look for Tua to be a backup the following year. Huge fan from LA since 2018. Hope you're doing all right if you read this. Why the fuck do you hate Chris Paul so much? I put laughing emoji, but serious question. Can you please explain? Someone DM'd me the other day, I think asking a similar question, and I said, the best part about sports, it's not just rooting for people, it's rooting against people. That's what makes this all so fun. And people you hate in life, like usually, it's a partnership gone bad, a relationship gone bad, a boss, right? It's just stuff that's just very angry. A lot of times in sports, like when I was a kid, I hated Shaq and Kobe. Why? They were kicking the King's ass. I hate Chris Paul because I hate the antics of the flopping. I despise it. I also think that the media created this point god. He's not even close to being a top 5 point guard all the time. The best point guard over the last decade, by a mile, has been Steph Curry, who has beat the living shit out of him at every turn. It's no different than I hate James Harden. I think he's the most overrated player I've ever seen. And I like rooting against these guys. I don't have that like in football. I'm not rooting against Brandon Staley or Cliff Kingsbury. I really don't care. But for whatever reason, and it may be just because I'm still, I got this fan in me with the Warriors, I've grown to hate some of the people that they've kicked their ass. Not, obviously, Chris and James have never beat the people that the Warriors beat, and people are always making excuses for them. Those people crumble like a cookie when it matters. Chris Paul just had one of the worst Game 7 losses in the history of sports. In the history of his nickname is the point god. The coach that beat him, Jason Kidd, Chris Paul couldn't hold his jock as a player. I don't know one GM in the history of basketball who if I get a 21-year-old Jason Kidd or a 21-year-old Chris Paul would choose Chris Paul. Not one. So this notion that I just think he's overhyped and overrated. And I blame the media. And there's no media that's quite the ball washers like the NBA media. It's like they work for the players. So people like me love making fun of these guys. Because without me, I think everyone would just, get on their knees and just revere these players that aren't even that good. The whole point of the sport is to win in the playoffs. These guys never win in the playoffs, ever. Ever. Chris had 1 year last year with the Suns in a bad West. Terrible West. Couldn't even win the championship. Giannis, great player. Dominant. 6 games. Champion. I'm glad Giannis did because I wouldn't have wanted Chris Paul to be a champion. Luckily, I don't have to worry about James Harden. I mean, he's terrible now. But it's fun to root against people. I had someone DM me I love rooting against Tom Brady. That's the whole point of sports. What are we doing? This is fun. I enjoy it. Part of watching the Warriors against the Mavericks. I got no issue with the Mavericks. I like Mark Cuban. I like Luka. I appreciate their kind of team of nobodies. I got so much joy when you hate the other team. That's what sports were built on. That's how we built the businesses of all these leagues. Hatred, for your opponent. Not actual, you don't actually care. I'm sure if I hung out with Chris, probably be a nice guy. Do you think the dynasties are improbable in the NFL going forward due to the impatience around the quarterback position and the explosion of offensive talent making teams go more all in more often? I think the Chiefs, we're going to see. I think the Chiefs have a chance to, have a 10, 12-year run. Can they win 2-3 Super Bowls, over a 8-year period? I think they would have the best opportunity. I do think if you have a good quarterback, not named Tom Brady, you sustain success. I mean, look at the Packers. They've been, they played this playoff game in 2022. I know they lost, but basically from 2009 to 2022, beside a couple years, I mean, they're making the playoffs every year and having playoff games at Lambeau all the time. So it's not a dynasty because they're not winning championships, but I think that is probably the new dynasty where you just make the playoffs all the time. Like the Packers, like the Chiefs. I'm trying to think of there aren't that many teams. Like the Ravens miss the playoffs sometimes. The Steelers miss the playoffs sometimes. Seattle had a run where they made it to the playoffs, I think, 6 out of 7 years. That's probably the new quote-unquote dynasty. Can you make the playoffs 8 out of 9 years? What the Chiefs are doing is pretty impressive, right? They've been to 2 Super Bowls. They won 1. They've basically been to the playoffs every year for the last decade except 1. Once Andy got there, how many? Maybe he's been there 9 years. They made it 8. Maybe it's 10, and they've made it 9. Whatever the. Obviously, the Patriots. To me, the Patriots are an outlier. With vertical, horizontal proliferation of city suburbs catering to booming population, smart DMer here. Why wouldn't the NFL advocate for, let's say, 2 expansion teams for each conference? Would love to hear your thoughts on this one. I would say, why would the other owners want to split the revenue? To me, you would move teams. There's no reason to add teams. There aren't that many good quarterbacks. You dilute your product. I'd say the NFL's in every major city. Is there a major city they're not really in? So, to me, that's not their problem. Their business is not really based on cities. It's based on television, and they're crushing it on TV. So, they do not want to expand. If you were going to expand, you might as well move the Jags somewhere, and we'd have to figure out the other team. But, yeah, I don't think you're in expansion mode. If I owned a team, I would be anti-expansion because it's cutting in. I get 132 of the revenue. Why would I want to get 136 of the revenue? Simple math equation. So I don't think that's on the table. With you as a big Fresno State guy and understanding McDaniels is an offensive genius, what are your thoughts on the Raiders' offense this year? Renfro, Adams, and Waller. Would also like to hear your thoughts on Carr as a quarterback. God, I got something in my throat. I ate a lot of you ever eat those white popcorns in that black bag that you can get at a gas station? White cheddar. Oh, my God. Those things melt in your mouth. I was actually at the store yesterday. I went in there to try to be healthy. Ended up getting just so many snacks. I got 2 big bags of that white cheddar popcorn. I went through a bag. Now, granted, it was, Tiger teed off this morning, 6 a.m. my time. I was eating that stuff at 6 a.m. I went through a bag in less than 24 hours. And I'm not talking the small bag. I'm talking the massive bag. And enjoyed every second of it. I think their team should be really good. I mean, Renfro is one of the better slot receivers in the league. Devontae is the best wide receiver in the league. And Waller's a top 3 or 4 tight end. He just got to stay healthy. He was banged up a lot last year. And like I said with Derek, to me, Derek's good. When he's on a good team, he can be somewhere between the 8th and 12th quarterback. And when you're that good, you can compete for a Super Bowl, right? I mean, Stafford is not a top 5 quarterback, but he's 5, 6, 7, and 8 in that range. You put him on a really good team, you can win the Super Bowl. Stafford's obviously better than Derek, but Derek's probably in that next tier, but he's good enough to compete with a lot of guys who I see competing in the playoffs. But he needs a good coach, a good offensive coordinator, which Josh is a good offensive coordinator. Can he be a good head coach? Their offensive line sucks. Their offensive line is not good. They drafted Leatherwood last year in the first round, the dude from Alabama. He's not a very good player. I mean, he's just they couldn't play right tackle. They moved him to right guard. He was even worse. So if they can't, Derek's not a guy that can overcome a bad offensive line. Most quarterbacks aren't, but Mahomes can run around. Josh Allen can run around. That's not really Derek's game. He's got to be comfortable. He's like a rhythm guy. So that to me is their number one question. The offensive line. They have the weapons. I mean, they're running backs. Obviously, they're wide receivers. I don't know why they traded Brian Edwards, the South Carolina wide receiver. I liked him, but clearly Josh McDaniels and Ziegler did not, because I think who they traded him to, the Falcons. That was a good trade by the Falcons. He's a decent little player. He's not little either. He's big. That's a good trade. I don't know why more teams weren't all over him. I don't know if there's something going on off the field, but I always like Brian Edwards. So I'll get back to do more mailbag this weekend. Appreciate everyone listening. See you. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description, and make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.